You know, this show is firmly rooted in liberty. I have another physician, a surprise guest, joining me right now. We're going to go to first here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. First time on the air with me, the son of Dr. Ron Paul. It's Dr. Rand Paul. Welcome to the Robert Scott Bell Show.
Good to be with you, Robert.
Hey, I am honored to finally meet you and have you on board here, especially as you've just announced an exploratory committee to run for Senate in the state of Kentucky. We're heard on 96.1, I believe, I think it's XLO or LXO, I apologize, in Lexington, and I'm so glad you're on board here, and I know you are a lover of liberty as well.
Yes, very much so, and we are excited with the news. We just announced this week that we will be forming an exploratory committee for the U.S. Senate, and we're excited with the prospects of what may happen here. It's still a lot up in the air because our incumbent senator still says he's running, which kind of muddies the waters, but a lot of people think he's really not running, so we're going to see what happens over the next month or two.
Oh, indeed. This is a very intriguing story. I caught you on the Rachel Maddow show, and like your dad has said, and like you say, freedom brings us together. It does not divide us. Hence, someone that's considered a far leftist is, I don't know if she outright embraced you, but certainly she was very kind, and she's been kind to your father.
Well, and I think the interesting thing about freedom is that you and I might not completely agree on chemotherapy in every different case, whether it's good or bad, but what we can agree on is that the freedom of the individual to make that decision.
Absolutely, and that is the message here. And I said this last hour. I said, even if you are a fan of oncology and think chemotherapy is the only way to go, you have to recognize the danger here is not one treatment or the other per se, even if we can argue about that. It's about the state forcing it on a family that believes they should go a different direction.
Right, and that's the issue I think we can agree on, particularly for adults. It becomes a little trickier for kids, but for the most part, I'd say that kids belong to the parents and not to the state. And so most of the time, those decisions should be made by the parents, particularly since, we have made mistakes in organized medicine. The first swine flu vaccine was a good example of that. 25 people died from the vaccine, 500 got Guillain-Barré syndrome, and only one ended up dying from the flu that year. That was back in 1976.
Yeah, and this is something I've covered at length, and I've been interviewed all over this nation on this subject because there seemed to be an awareness that maybe the government doesn't have the medical solutions here. And yet the Obama administration has asked for, $1.5 billion or $2 billion more as emergency to produce an experimental vaccine. That the last time they did this, it was a disaster.
Well, I think anytime you centralize decision-making, whether it's for the economy, for the price of bread, or for the price of medicines, or for which medicines get used, or for which care is appropriate and not appropriate, the more central it becomes, the more chance there is that one person gets to make the decision or 10 people get to make the decision, and that they could occasionally make the wrong decision. Another vaccine they had just recently that everybody's pushing, and I think it almost became mandatory for a while, was the rotavirus vaccine for the diarrhea illness in children.
Yes.
And it turns out they used it about 6 months, and it was causing an intestinal blockage, and I think they may have had a few deaths from that. They pulled it. But very quickly, these people jumped to mandatory without saying, well, yeah, we have this, and if some people want to try it out, there are some risks, and let them try it out. But no, they want to jump in and make it forced so you can't attend school unless you get these vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, and you're a physician as well, and you've got this acknowledgement like your father that this is about freedom. Where is it the idea that in our founding documents that we should grant monopolies to certain segments of society? Rather than, my background, I was raised pharmaceutically. I became more in the homeopathic realm, natural remedies and medicines. I've helped others to get well from diseases that are supposedly incurable. What are my eyes lying to me? Where is the freedom to choose in this case? And that's the issue.
Right, and every instance is a little bit different. For example, we have a good friend here in town, and she had metastatic colon cancer, and without chemotherapy only would have lived about 3 months on average. She lived 3 or 4 years because they do have a new drug that's working very well for this. She didn't survive ultimately, but she was able to see her kids for 3 or 4 years, and chemotherapy, everybody thought, was a blessing for her. But then we have another friend who had inoperable brain cancer, and radiation and chemotherapy were offered, but they weren't offered, they were offering her maybe 1 month, and she chose not to do it. But those are individual decisions, and I wouldn't have presumed to tell either family because, one, it's none of my business, but it's just a really hard decision that each individual has to make. And I don't come down on the side of not believing in any modern medicine. I still believe in, a lot of the things we do. There are some childhood leukemias and cancers that do very well with chemotherapy and can be cured. And then there are some where it's palliative, and then it ultimately just has to be the family or the individual has to decide.
Well, I think, and this is Dr. Rand Paul, by the way, everybody, on the Robert Scott Bell Show right now for the first time. And, one of the things that I've boiled this down to is this is individualism versus collectivism. This idea that one size fits all, whether it be in medicine or any other realm, denies the freedom of the individual, that which, that gift of freedom that was given to us from something far higher than government. And I think that, many of my friends in the medical profession acknowledge this and say, this is about freedom. This is not about whether you're forced to go to me for treatment. It should be about your ability to educate yourself and make an informed decision.
Right, exactly right, and that's why we don't want more central control of it. And I'm afraid that's what we're going to get with this administration is more and more central control, more and more exact algorithms that every disease has to be treated this way,
yes,
or it's either malpractice or we're not going to pay you. And government will become more and more the only payer of medicine, and so they'll control more and more of the decision-making process. And, I think that is something that is pretty scary.
Well, this is something, as we got a few more minutes with Dr. Rand Paul before he has to run here, but this issue of the Obama administration proposing that we will save $1 trillion over 10 years, which it's a smokescreen in reality, if we would all be forced into buying insurance, everybody, whether they wanted to or not. And many of the things offered in those insurance plans, I have no interest in ever utilizing. And again, it's a violation of my fundamental freedom to choose what's right for me and my family.
Well, what it'll end up doing is a lot of these mandatory insurance programs involve in vitro fertilization being covered and pregnancy coverage. Now, if you're a 75-year-old widowed woman, you don't have much use for those things, so you're just basically going to pay a tax for the small amount of percentage of the public that wants those. And so it's sort of a cross-subsidy. But, P.J. O'Rourke has a good point about health care. He says, you think it's expensive now, wait till it's free.
Exactly.
So it is a smokescreen when they say that they're going to save money. And the thing is even if you took them at their word, let's say we were going to save $2 trillion, the key word is force. It's sort of like, would we embrace slavery if we would have full employment? We don't embrace the use of force for certain things. We think that certain rights are inalienable, but then all of a sudden, force is okay to force people to buy a certain insurance product. And an insurance product isn't necessarily health care either. You're making people buy some sort of business plan to prepay for their insurance.
Yeah, exactly. Again, and freedom loses in that equation. How has the response been in Kentucky since you've been, shaking the trees out there, so to speak, to maybe run for Senate if Bunning doesn't run there? What's the response on the ground in Kentucky?
I think very good. I think the Republicans are looking for somebody new. One of the things Republicans have lost, I think, is their believability on the deficit. We've always said we were fiscal conservatives, but then when we were in charge under the Bush administration, we doubled the deficit from $5 to $10 trillion. Now we complain about Obama, but President Obama looks back and says, who are you to criticize me? Y'all doubled the deficit when you were in charge. So we really are going to need new voices and new people in the Republican Party in order to regain our believability.
Yeah, indeed.